Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through town. A man there named Zacchaeus, a ruler among tax collectors, was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he couldn't because of the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed up a sycamore tree so that he could see Jesus, who was about to pass that way. When Jesus came to the spot, he looked up and said, "Zacchaeus, come down at once. I must stay in your home today." So Zacchaeus came down at once, happy to welcome Jesus. Everyone who saw this grumbled, saying, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, I give half of my possessions to the poor. If I have cheated anyone, I repay them 4 times as much." The Lord said to him, "Today salvation has come to this household, because he too is a son of Abraham. The human one came to seek and save the lost." As they listened to this, Jesus told them another parable because he was near Jerusalem and they thought God's kingdom would appear right away. He said there was a certain man who was born into royalty, went to a distant land to receive his kingdom, and then returned. He called together 10 servants and gave each of them money worth 4 months' wages. He said, "Do business with this until I return." His citizens hated him, so they sent a representative after him who said, "We don't want this man to be our king." After receiving his kingdom, he returned and called the servants to find out how much they had earned. The first servant came forward and said, "Your money has earned a return of 1,000%. The king replied, "Excellent, you are a good servant. Because you were faithful in a small matter, you will have authority over 10 cities." The second servant came and said, "Master, your money has made a return of 500%. To this one, the king said, "You will have authority over 5 cities. Another servant came and said, "Master, here's your money. I wrapped it up in a scarf for safekeeping. I was afraid of you because you are a stern man. You withdraw what you haven't deposited, and you harvest what you haven't planted." The king replied, "I will judge you by the words of your own mouth, you worthless servant. You know, did you, that I'm a stern man, withdrawing what I didn't deposit and harvesting what I didn't plant? Why then didn't you put my money in the bank? Then when I arrived, at least I could have gotten it back with interest." He said to his attendants, "Take his money and give it to the one who has 10 times as much." They said, "But master, he already has 10 times as much." He replied, "I say to you that everyone who has will be given more, but from those who don't have, even what they have will be taken away. As for my enemies who don't want me as their king, bring them here and slaughter them before me." After Jesus said this, he continued on, going up to Jerusalem. As he approached Bethphage and Bethany on the Mount of Olives, he gave 2 disciples a task. He said, "Go into the village over there. When you enter it, you will find tied up there a colt that no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If someone asks, 'Why are you untying it?' just say, 'Its master needs it.'" They went and found things just as Jesus had told them. As they were untying the colt, its owner said to them, "Why are you untying the colt?" They replied, "Its master needs it." They brought it to They brought the colt to Jesus. No, they brought it to Jesus, placed him on the colt. Put their clothes on the colt and lifted Jesus onto it. As Jesus rode along, they spread their clothes on the road. As Jesus approached the road leading down from the Mount of Olives, the whole throng of his disciples began rejoicing. They praised God with a loud voice because of all the mighty things they had seen. They said, "Blessings on the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest heavens." Some of the Pharisees from the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, scold your disciples. Tell them to stop." He answered, "I tell you, if they were silent, the stones would shout." As Jesus came to the city and observed it, he wept over it. He said, "If only you knew on this of all days the things that lead to peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. The time will come when your enemies will build fortifications around you, encircle you, and attack you from all sides. They will crush you completely, you and the people within you. They won't leave one stone on top of another within you, because you didn't recognize the time of your gracious visit from God." As when Jesus entered the temple, he threw out those who were selling things there. He said to them, "It is written, my house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a hideout for crooks." Every day Jesus was teaching in the temple. The chief priests, the legal experts, and the foremost leaders among the people were seeking to kill him. However, they couldn't find a way to do it because all the people were enthralled with what they heard. On one of the days when Jesus was teaching the people in the temple and proclaiming the good news, the chief priests, legal experts, and elders approached him. They said, "Tell us, what kind of authority do you have for doing these things? Who gave you this authority?" He replied, "I have a question for you. Tell me, was John's baptism of heavenly or of human origin?" They discussed among themselves. "If we say it's of heavenly origin, he'll say, 'Why didn't you believe him?' But if we say it's of human origin, all the people will stone us to death, because they are convinced that John was a prophet." They answered that they didn't know where it came from. Then Jesus replied, "Neither will I tell you what kind of authority I have for doing these things." Jesus told the people this parable. A certain man planted a fig tree, rented it to tenant farmers, and went on a trip for a long time. When it was time, he sent a servant to collect from the tenants his share of the fruit of the vineyard. But the tenants sent him away, beaten and empty-handed. The man sent another servant, but they beat him, treated him disgracefully, and sent him away empty-handed as well. He sent a third servant. They wounded this servant and threw him out. The owner of the vineyard said, "What should I do? I'll send my son, whom I love dearly. Perhaps they will respect him." But when they saw him, they said to each other, "This is the heir. Let's kill him so the inheritance will be ours." They threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy those tenants and give the vineyard to others. When the people heard this, they said, "May this never happen." Staring at them, Jesus said, "Then what is the meaning of this text of Scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be crushed, and the stone will crush the person it falls on." The legal experts and chief priests wanted to arrest Jesus right then because they knew he had told the parable against them, but they feared the people. The legal experts and chief priests sent spies who pretended to be sincere. They wanted to trap him in his word so they could hand him over to the jurisdiction and authority of the governor. They said, Teacher, we know that you're correct in what you say and teach. You don't show favoritism, but teach God's way as it really is. Does the law allow people to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" Since Jesus recognized their deception, he said to them, "Show me a coin. Whose image and inscription does it have on it?" "Caesar's," they replied. He said to them, "Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God." They couldn't trap him in his words in front of the people. Astonished by his answer, they were speechless. Astonished by his answer, they were speechless. Some Sadducees who deny that there's a resurrection came to Jesus and asked, "Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a widow but no children, the brother must marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. There were 7 brothers. The first man. Now there were 7 brothers. The first man married a woman and died childless. The second and then the third married her. Eventually, all 7 married her, and they all died without leaving any children. Finally, the woman died too in the resurrection. Whose wife will she be? All 7 were married to her." Jesus said to them, "People who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy to participate in that age, that is, in the age of the resurrection of the dead, won't marry nor be given in marriage. They can no longer die because they're like angels and are God's children since they share in the resurrection. Even Moses demonstrates that the dead are raised in the passage about the bush when he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. To him they are all alive." Some of the legal experts responded, "Teacher, you have answered well." No one dared to ask him anything else. Jesus said to them, "Why do they say that the Christ is David's son? David himself says in the scroll of the Psalms, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right side until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet.' Since David calls him Lord, how can he be David's son?" In the presence of all the people, Jesus began to speak first to his disciples. Watch out for the legal experts. They like to walk around in long robes. They love being greeted with honor in the markets. They long for the places of honor in the synagogues and at banquets. They cheat widows out of their homes, and to show off they say long prayers. They will be judged most harshly. Looking up, Jesus saw rich people throwing their gifts into the collection box for the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow throw in 2 small copper coins worth a penny. He said, "I assure you that this poor widow has put in more than them all. All of them are giving out of their spare change, but she from her hopeless poverty has given everything she had to live on." Some people were talking about the temple, how it was decorated with beautiful stones and ornaments dedicated to God. He said to them, as for the things you're admiring, the time is coming when not even one stone will be left upon another, all will be demolished. They asked him, "Teacher, when will these things happen? What sign will show that these things are about to happen?" Jesus said, "Watch out that you aren't deceived. Many will come in my name saying, 'I'm the one,' and it's time. Don't follow them. When you hear of wars and rebellions, don't be alarmed. These things must happen first, but the end won't happen immediately." Then Jesus said to them, "Nations and kingdoms will fight against each other. There will be great earthquakes and wide-scale food shortages and epidemics. There will also be terrifying sights and great signs in the sky. But before all this occurs, they will take you into custody and harass you because of your faith. You'll be handed over to synagogues and prisons, and you'll be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will provide you with an opportunity to testify. Make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance. I'll give you words and wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to counter or contradict." You will be betrayed by your parents, brothers and sisters, relatives and friends. Everyone will hate you. They will execute some of you. Everyone will hate you because of my name. Still, not a hair on your heads will be lost. By holding fast, you will gain your lives. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you will know that its destruction is close at hand. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you will know that its destruction is close at hand. At that time, those in Jerusalem must flee to the mountains, those in the city must escape, and those in the countryside must not enter the city. Those in Judea must flee to the mountains, those in the city must escape, and those in the countryside must not enter the city. These are the days of punishment when everything written will find its fulfillment. How terrible it will be at that time for women who are pregnant or for women who are nursing their children. There will be great agony on the earth and angry judgment on this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be taken away as captives among all nations. Jerusalem will be plundered by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are concluded. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth, there will be dismay among nations and their confusion over the roaring of the sea and surging waves. The planets and other heavenly bodies will be shaken, causing people to faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the earth. Then they will see the human one coming on a cloud with power and great splendor. Now when these things begin to happen, stand up straight and raise your heads, because your redemption is near. Jesus told this parable. Look at the fig trees and all the trees. When they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves and know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see these things happening, you know that God's kingdom is near. I assure you that this generation won't pass away until everything has happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Take care that your hearts aren't dulled by drinking parties, drunkenness, and the anxieties of day-to-day life. Don't let this day fall upon you unexpectedly like a trap. It will come upon everyone who lives on the face of the whole earth. Stay alert at all times, praying that you are strong enough to escape everything that is about to happen and to stand before the human one. Jesus was teaching every day in the temple, but he spent each night on the Mount of Olives. All the people rose early in the temple in the morning to hear him in the temple area. The festival of unleavened bread, which is called Passover, was approaching. The chief priests and the legal experts were looking for a way to kill Jesus because they were afraid of the people. Then Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, who was one of the 12. He went out and discussed with the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard how he could hand Jesus over to them. They were delighted and arranged payment for him. He agreed and began looking for an opportunity to hand Jesus over to them, a time when the crowds would be absent. A time when the crowds would be absent. The day of unleavened bread arrived. When the Passover had to be sacrificed, Jesus sent Peter and John with this task. Go and prepare for us to eat the Passover meal. They said to him, where do you want us to prepare it? Jesus replied, when you enter the city, a man carrying a water jar will meet you. Follow him to the house he enters. Say to the owner of the house, where is the guest room where I can eat the Passover with my disciples? He will show you a large upstairs room already furnished. Make preparations there. They went and found everything. Those who had been sent found everything just as Jesus told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. When it was time, Jesus entered and took his place at the table, and his apostles joined him. He said to them, I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. I assure you that I won't eat it until it is fulfilled in God's kingdom. After taking a cup and giving thanks, he said to them, take this and share it among yourselves. I assure you that I won't drink from the fruit of the vine until God's kingdom has come. After taking the bread, And giving thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, he took the cup after the meal and said, "This cup is the new covenant by my blood, which is poured out for you. But look, my betrayer is with me. His hand is on this table. The human one goes just as it has been determined, but how terrible it is for that person who betrays him. It would be better for him to be thrown into a lake with a large stone hung around. No. But how terrible it is for the one who betrays him." They began to argue among themselves about which of them it could possibly be who would do this. An argument broke out among the disciples over which one of them was the greatest. But Jesus said to them, "The kings of the Gentiles rule over their subjects, and those in authority over them are called friends of the people, but that's not the way it will be with you. Instead, the greatest among you must become like a person of lower status, and a leader like a servant. So which one is greater, the one who is seated at the table or the one who serves at the table? Isn't it the one who is seated at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. You are the ones who have continued with me in my trials, and I confer royal power on you, just as my Father granted royal power to me. Thus you will eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit on thrones, overseeing the 12 tribes of Israel. Simon, Simon, Satan has asserted the right to sift you all like wheat. However, I've prayed for you that your faith won't fail. When you have returned, strengthen your brothers and sisters." Peter responded, "Lord, I'm ready to go with you, both to prison and to death." Jesus replied, "I tell you, Peter, the rooster won't crow today before you have denied 3 times that you know me." Then Jesus said to them, "When I sent you out without a wallet, bag, or sandals, you didn't lack anything, did you?" They said, "Nothing." Then he said to them, "But now whoever has a wallet must take it, and likewise a bag, and those who don't own a sword must sell their clothes and buy one. I tell you that this scripture must be fulfilled in relation to me." And he was counted among the criminals. Indeed, what's written about me is nearing completion. They said to him, "Lord, here are 2 swords. Lord, look, here are 2 swords." He replied, "Enough of that." Jesus left and made his way to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. When he arrived, he said to them, "Pray that you won't give in to temptation." He withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down and prayed. He said, "Father, if it's possible, take this cup of suffering away from me. However, not my will, but your will must be done." Then a heavenly angel appeared to him and strengthened him. He was in anguish and prayed even more earnestly. His sweat became like drops of blood falling on the ground. When he got up from praying, he went to the disciples. He found them asleep, overcome by grief. He said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray, so you won't give in to temptation." While Jesus was still speaking, a crowd appeared, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him. Jesus said to him, "Judas, would you betray the human one with a kiss?" When those around him recognized what was about to happen, they said, "Lord, shall we fight with our swords?" One of them struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. Jesus responded, "Stop, no more of this." He touched the slave's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come to get him, "Have you come with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a thief? Day after day I was with you in the temple, but you didn't arrest me. But this is your time, when darkness rules." After they arrested Jesus, they led him away and brought him to the high priest's house. Peter followed from a distance. When they lit a fire together and sat down together, Peter sat among them. Then a servant woman saw him sitting in the firelight. She stared at him and said, "You are one of them too." But Peter replied, "Woman, I don't know him." A little while later, someone else saw him and said, "You're one of them too." I think I got that one part wrong. Servant woman saw him sitting in the firelight. She stared at him and said, "This man was with him too." But Peter replied, "Woman, I don't know him." A little while later, someone else saw him and said, "You're one of them too." But Peter said, "Man, I'm not." An hour or so later, someone else saw him and someone else insisted, "This man must have been with him because he's a Galilean too." Peter responded, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." At that very moment, while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter, and Peter remembered the Lord's words. "Before a rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And Peter went out and wept uncontrollably. The men who were holding Jesus in custody taunted him while they beat him. They blindfolded him and asked him repeatedly, "Prophesy, who hit you?" Insulting him, they said many other horrible things against him. As morning came, the chief priests and legal experts came together, and Jesus was brought before their council. They said, "If you're the Christ, tell us." Jesus, he replied, "If I tell you, you won't believe, and if I ask you a question, you won't answer. But from now on, the human one will be seated on the right side of the power of God." They all said, "Are you God's son then?" He answered, "You say that I am." Then they said, "Why do we need further testimony? We've heard it from his own lips." The whole assembly got up and led Jesus to Pilate. They said, "We have found this man misleading our people, opposing the payment of taxes to Caesar, and claiming that he is the Christ, the king." Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "That's what you say." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no legal basis for action against this man." But they objected strenuously, saying, "He agitates the people with his teaching throughout Judea, starting from Galilee all the way here." Hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was from Herod's district, Pilate sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Herod was very glad to see Jesus, for he had heard about Jesus and had wanted to see him for quite some time. He was hoping to see Jesus perform some sign. Herod questioned Jesus at length, but Jesus didn't respond to him. The chief priests and the legal experts were there, fiercely accusing Jesus. Herod and his soldiers treated Jesus with contempt. Herod mocked him by dressing Jesus up in elegant clothes and sending him back to Pilate. Pilate and Herod became friends with each other that day. Before this, they had been enemies. Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the rulers of the people, "You brought this man before me as one who is misleading the people." I better look at what that is. Then Pilate called together the chief priests and rulers of the people. Then Pilate called together the chief priests and the rulers of the people. He said to them, "You brought this man before me as one who is misleading the people. I have questioned him in your presence and have found nothing in this man's conduct that provides a legal basis for the charges you have brought against him. He's done nothing that deserves death. Neither did Herod, because he returned him to us. He's done nothing that deserves death. Therefore, I will have him whipped and let him go." But with one voice they shouted, "Away with this man." But with one voice they shouted, "Away with this man." But with one voice they shouted, "Away with him. Release Barabbas for us." Away with him. Release Barabbas for us. Barabbas had been thrown into prison because of a riot that had occurred in the city and for murder. Pilate addressed them again because he wanted to release Jesus. They kept shouting out, "Crucify him, crucify him. Away with this man. Release Barabbas to us." Where was I? They kept shouting out, "Crucify him, crucify him." For the third time, Pilate said to them, "Why, what wrong has he done? He's done nothing that deserves death. Therefore, I will have him whipped, then let him go." But with one voice, but they were adamant, shouting their demand that Jesus be crucified. Their voices won out. Pilate issued his decision to grant their request. He released the one they asked for, who had been thrown into prison because of a riot and murder, but he handed Jesus over to their will. But he handed Jesus over to their will. As they led Jesus away, they grabbed Simon, a man from Cyrene who was coming in from the countryside. They put the cross on his back and made him carry it behind Jesus. A huge crowd of people followed Jesus, including women who were weeping and mourning for him. Jesus turned to the women and said, Daughters of Jerusalem, don't cry for me. Rather cry for yourselves and your children. The time is coming when they will say, Happy are the women who never became pregnant, the wombs who never gave birth, and the breasts that never nursed a child. Then they will say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. If they do these things while the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry? And they also led 2 other criminals to be executed with Jesus. When they arrived at the place called the Skull, they crucified him along with the criminals, one on his right, and the other on his left. Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. They drew lots as a way of dividing up his clothing. The people were standing around watching, but the leaders stared at him, saying, He saved others. Let him save himself if he really is the Christ sent from God, the chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him. They came up to him, offering him sour wine and saying, If you really are the King of the Jews, save yourself. Above his head was a notice of the formal charge against him. It read, This is the King of the Jews. This is the King of the Jews. One of the criminals hanging next to Jesus insulted him. Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us. Responding, the other criminal spoke harshly to him. Don't you fear God? Seeing that you've also been sentenced to die, we are rightly condemned, for we are receiving the appropriate sentence for what we did, but this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus said to him, I assure you that today you will be with me in paradise. It was now about noon, and darkness covered the whole earth until about 3 o'clock, when the sun stopped shining. Then the curtain in the sanctuary tore down the middle. Crying out with a loud voice, Jesus said, Father, into your hands I entrust my life. After Jesus said this, he breathed for the last time. When the centurion saw what had taken place, he responded, When the centurion saw what had taken place, he shouted, This man, what? It's really true. This man was righteous. Let me look at it. Let me check myself here. When the centurion saw what happened, he praised God. When the centurion saw what happened, he praised God, saying, It's really true. This man was righteous. All the crowds who had come together to see this event returned to their homes, beating their chests after seeing what had happened, and everyone who knew him, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance observing these things. Now there was a man named Joseph who was a member of the council. He was a good and righteous man. He hadn't agreed with the plan and actions of the council. He was from the Jewish city of Arimathea and eagerly anticipated God's kingdom. This man went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Taking it down, he wrapped it in a linen cloth and laid it in a tomb carved out of the rock in which no one had ever been buried. It was preparation day for the Sabbath, and the Sabbath was quickly approaching. The women who had come with Jesus from Galilee followed Joseph. They saw the tomb and how Jesus' body was laid in it, then went away and prepared fragrant spices and perfumed oils. They rested on the Sabbath in keeping with the commandment. They rested on the Sabbath in keeping with the commandment. Very early in the morning on the first day of the week, the women went to the tomb, bringing the fragrant spices they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they didn't find the body of the Lord Jesus. They didn't know what to make of this. Suddenly, 2 men in white clothing stood next to them. The women were frightened and bowed their faces toward the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He isn't here, but has been raised. Remember what he told you while he was still in Galilee, that the human one must be handed over to sinners, be crucified, and on the third day rise again." Then they remembered the Lord's words. When they returned from the tomb, the women reported all these things to the 11 and all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women who told these things to the apostles. Is it Mary the mother of James? Yep. But their words struck the apostles as nonsense, and they didn't believe the women. But Peter ran to the tomb. When he bent over to look inside, he saw only the linen cloth. Then he returned home wondering what had happened. On that same day, 2 disciples were traveling to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking to each other about everything that had happened. While they were discussing these things, Jesus himself arrived and joined them on their journey. They were prevented from recognizing them. He said to them, "What are you talking about as you walk along?" They stopped, their faces downcast. The one named Cleopas replied, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who is unaware of the things that have taken place there over the last few days?" He said to them, "What things?" They said to him, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth. Because of his powerful deeds and words, he was recognized by God and all the people as a prophet. But our chief priests and our leaders handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. We had hoped that he was the one who would redeem Israel. All these things happened 3 days ago, but there's more. Some women from our group have left us stunned. They went to the tomb early this morning and didn't find his body. They came to us saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who told them he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found things just as the women had said. They didn't see him." Then Jesus said to them, "You foolish people, your dull minds keep you from believing all that the prophets talked about. Wasn't it necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and then enter into his glory? When Then he interpreted for them the things written about himself in all the scriptures, beginning from Moses and going through all the prophets. When they came to Emmaus, he acted as if he was going on ahead, but they urged him, saying, 'Stay with us. It's nearly evening, and the day was almost over.' So he went in to stay with them. After he took his seat at the table, he took the bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. But he disappeared from their sight. They said to each other, 'Weren't our hearts on fire when he spoke to us along the road, when he explained the scriptures for us?' They got up right then and returned to Jerusalem. They found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying to each other, 'The Lord really has risen.' He appeared to Simon. Then the 2 disciples described what had happened along the road and how Jesus was made known to them as he broke the bread. While he was saying these things, Jesus himself stood among them and said, 'Peace be to you.' They were terrified and afraid. They thought they were seeing a ghost. He said to them, 'Why are you startled? Why are doubts arising in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. It's really me. Touch me and see, for a ghost doesn't have flesh and bones like you see I have.' As he said these things, he showed them his hands and feet. Because they were wondering and questioning in the midst of their happiness, he said to them, 'Do you have anything to eat?' They gave him a piece of baked fish. Taking it, he ate it in front of them. He said to them, "Remember what I told you while I was still in Galilee." Nope. Okay. Let me think about this before I look. Taking it, he ate it in front of them. Jesus said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures. he said to them, "This is what is written, the Christ will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day, and a change of heart and life will be preached in his name, must be preached in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things. Look, I'm sending to you what my Father promised, but you are to stay in the city until you've been furnished with heavenly power." He led them out as far as Bethany, where he lifted his hands and blessed them. As he blessed them, he left them and was taken up to heaven. They worshipped him and returned to Jerusalem, overwhelmed with joy, and they were continuously in the temple praising God.